my pleasure to give you a short summary of this exercise we went through a few years ago, trying to understand. It was a positive deviance study, more or less. Everybody complains about general lackluster performance in African agriculture, and we set out to identify the outliers, what instances where agriculture performed unusually well. And I'm going to start with this picture. And basically, we were comparing roller coasters and rocket ships. Now, these are actual data from two different commodities in the same country. This is about 45-year span. And the red line is a common, this is more or less the story of African agriculture, this red line. You've got pretty much a flat trend in production and lots of volatility. You see that story over and over again. Less frequently, you see kind of the steady blue line ever upward at increasing trajectories. And that's my approximation of a rocket ship. And so basically what we did in this review is we tried to identify as many rocket ships as possible. We took in lots of nominations, and then we selected a dozen or so for in-depth case study. And we paired rocket ships with roller coasters. We looked at episodes of success and contrasting instances where the outcomes were not so favorable. And to keep your eyes focused on the prize here, I have distributed a quiz. See, become a good academic since I left IFPRI, and I've found that a pop quiz is a marvelous tool for focusing an audience's attention. And so I have a little 15-item quiz that I hope all of you have copies of. And at the end of the session, you will submit those, and the top prize will be awarded a complimentary copy of this important new book that is hot off the press. Now, the first 3 questions on your quiz, ladies and gentlemen, relate to this picture. Identify the roller coaster commodity. Tell me what is the rocket ship, that steady blue line, ever upward. And tell me what country these data are from. So those are your first 3 questions. Don't let your neighbors see, because they might poach your copy of the book. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a very quick overview of the methods. Peter's already covered this, so I won't dwell on that much. Mainly I'm going to focus on the lessons learned. And we came to some pretty clear conclusions about what has to happen. When you look at the rocket ships and compare them over time, it's pretty clear what has to happen. There are some nuances, as Peter said, on how to get there. There are, in fact, many paths, but we know pretty well what you have to do. So the methods, as Peter has already suggested, we entertain nominations across IFPRI's Africa mailing list. We had 250 or so nominations, and we picked a dozen to review. I should say that since I don't see anybody here from NEPAD Secretariat, but when we completed all these case studies, we undertook a very extensive set of consultations. We said, okay, we've got these dozen case studies. How can we really generalize from that? And we went on the road with Richard Makandawiri and the NEPAD Secretariat. We held 3 different consultations in different parts of Africa to test out what we thought were the main lessons coming from this. And so I will say that the general messages has been very thoroughly vetted in that forum. You can scan the brief and see we had a range of different commodities and countries and activities that we looked at. not going to go into this in detail. You have to read chapter 8 and all of the individual case studies to really see how they all fit together. But there were some general categories of interventions and some common themes that emerged. So the main message there is that we had a method, and we tried to apply it rigorously and look at these positive deviants and see what it is that made them special. So the first question we wanted to answer is what has to happen? We want agriculture to grow more robustly than it has in the past. So what has to happen for that to occur? And the bottom line is it takes two things. It takes increased productivity, and it takes market incentives of some kind. We're going to go over that a time or two from a couple different directions. This is the framework we used. Those of you in the front can see this. Basically, the centerpiece of African agriculture is the farm household. And if we want the farmer's performance to improve, we have basically two ways of influencing the farmer. We don't operate large state farms anymore. We've got to induce some change, enable some change among private farmers. And there are really basically two instruments for doing that. The first one is raising productivity somehow, enabling farmers to do more with their resources, which are often 4 unskilled laborers and about 1.5 hectares of land. We want to raise productivity given some pretty serious resource constraints. Well, there are several ways you can do that. One of the common ones is to supply improved technology, some new seed package. Now, questions 4 and 5 on your quiz have to do with identifying these improved technologies. I'm going to give you a little hint. On the bottom left, it's not a goat, not a hamster. We have a cow, okay? And if you tell me it's a brown cow, you're only going to get partial credit. I want to know what is the improved breed of cow. This picture is taken in Kenya. This particular cow produces 4 times as much milk as the standard zebu, roughly quadruple. So tell me what kind of cow that is. The picture on the right, can anybody tell me what commodity that is? Oh, this is a good group. All right, very good. These are improved cassava varieties. Depends where you go. This particular picture is from Nigeria, where these improved varieties increase yields about 50%. In Zambia, where we also did a case study, it was roughly double. Yields roughly doubled. Sorry? That's dry matter yield, yes. That's right. No, the new variety is very productive. You can see it takes two people to lift this. And if you've ever harvested cassava, this is a very impressive set of roots. To win your grand prize here today, you're going to have to tell me what is the improved cassava series released by IITA that really launched this productivity revolution in Africa. You need to read, all right? There's a name for this series of improved genetic varieties, came out of IITA, really revolutionized breeding across the whole middle section of Africa. And we see productivity gains continuing to this day. So that's question 5. What is that series? It made a huge impact. The nice thing, I guess I should just say about the cassava story is that it's a vegetatively propagated crop. So if this is what a planting stick looks like. It's a little bit longer, about as big around as my thumb, but you take that stick, you can see the stick that these these farmers are holding there. You put that in the ground, you come back 12 to 24 months later and you get roots like this. There's nothing else added. And the nice thing about this is that in the old days, you would use a skinny little stick like this, stick it in the ground, and you got 6 tons. You take an improved stick. I don't see any improved sticks here. Here's an improved stick. You take this stick in the ground with your same family labor. Instead of 6 tons, you get 12. And if you're good at it, you get up to 20. So with no additional inputs, just a different stick, you get roughly double the productivity. It's really a massive increase in productivity. And I consider it one of the most elegant pieces of high technology ever developed. My daughter got a new iPad or pod or something, and she thinks that's fancy technology. But it really doesn't compare to these improved cassava cutting sticks. This is elegant. It's very high productivity, very complex genetics, but hand-hoe African farmers can stick it in the ground and double their output. And that makes a huge difference in their life because they can cultivate half as much area, they can release kids to send them to school and so on. So these productivity gains are sometimes really astonishing and extremely powerful. To raise productivity, new technology packages are something people often think of. They don't often think about management. And I'm going to just show you these numbers. This is looking at conservation farming data from Zambia. I just want you to look at that early planting line. Yes, you can see it all. Just look at the maize. You got 400 kgs of additional output just from planting on time. Now, the rule of thumb in semi-arid agriculture in Africa is that for every day late that you plant, you lose 1 to 2% in yield. So if Rajul, who's very disciplined and very well organized, plants her maize on November 15th, and I'm very busy and not so well organized, and if I don't plant till December 15th, if we plant the same variety, same hybrid, the same fertilizer, the same everything, she's going to get 30 to 60% higher yield from the same technology package just because she planted early. There are a lot of other management practices that can increase yield. Many of these technologies that we looked at really revolved around substituting management for purchased inputs. But the productivity gains can be very, very significant. So don't forget the management. I think the Ugandans have put it the best. Their plan for agricultural development is called the Plan to Modernize Agriculture. And that's really what we want to do. We want high productivity professional farmers in Africa. It's possible to do, but it takes very strong management, and that takes a lot of work to do that. Third way to raise productivity, nobody ever talks about this, marketing. In Africa, consumers pay the highest marketing margins in the world for a variety of reasons. And there are some ways to reduce those margins. These are pictures, and this is your, I thought this was on your quiz. Oh yes, question 6 on your quiz is you have to tell me what country this comes from. These are maize marketing margins over about a 20-year period. And what you see is that the marketing margin, it's the difference between the blue line and the red. The green line is, in fact, the margin, and you can see it steadily falling. Roughly, it fell in half over a 20-year period for a variety of reasons. That makes a huge difference. From the consumer's point of view, the marketing productivity is even more important than the farm productivity because the marketing margin accounts for such a large share of the final cost. So when you think about raising productivity in Africa, don't forget about the marketing end of the system. Big gains there. So to raise productivity, to enable farmers to do more with what they have, there are several different ways to do that. Now, what about incentives? You can grow lots, and if it just rots in the field, it doesn't do you any good. So what we found is in the cases where we had steady upward trajectories, you had a big productivity bump, but you also had a reliable market. You had good market incentives. So farmers had incentives to use the good sticks, the new powerful technologies. Probably the best example of that comes from Nigeria. And this is cassava production in Nigeria over the last 40 years. Now, these new cassava varieties were released in Nigeria in 1977. See that first red line. But production really didn't change. It stayed flat there until the early 80s. Now, why is that? Well, in 1977, we had a huge productivity boost. But you had really no incentive for farmers to grow these improved varieties. Why was that? Because Nigeria was awash with oil money. They had an overvalued exchange rate. Imported wheat and rice were very cheap, and to make it even cheaper, the Nigerian government subsidized them madly. Well, they ran out of oil money in 1984. They dropped the subsidies, devalued the naira, and that's when the cassava really took off. So it was when you had the improved technology together with the market incentives that you saw this take off like a rocket ship. So you need the two together. Here's a case from Kenya. This is horticultural exports. Purely private sector led, but really the market end of this was a key part of what has sustained that growth over time. So it takes two things to sustain increases in agricultural productivity. And that in fact, Peter's asked me to explain the cover of this book, and you really need to study this. But basically, there are two little trails here. One's called increased productivity, and the other one is called market incentives. And where those two come together, all of a sudden, you can mobilize inputs and market outputs, and you reach Eden when the two paths cross. So it's those two things that have to come together to enable these sustained upward trajectories in agriculture. Sorry? Okay, good. All right, well, I'm getting to the hard part, so that I'm happy to accelerate. So the question is how? And the what to do is easy. The how is a little more difficult because there are many ways to do it. I think there are really three lessons in looking at this. One is to look at what's the appropriate role for the private sector versus the public. You need to find public goods and invest in those. I'm just going to highlight one of them, which again nobody talks about very much, but which came through over and over again in these case studies. There are a lot of negative externalities from diseases. And this little loop in the whole process is really very critical in most of these systems, because over time, it's not only farmers that adjust, but viruses, fungi, insects. They have lifespans of 30 days. You get a new generation coming on stream once a month. So you can't just sit back and say, oh, I have a new variety of disease-tolerant maize. Doesn't matter. 2 months from now, you're going to have a brand new variety of virus and fungus that may crack that new genetic code. So these pests and diseases evolve right along with the farm technology. Your question 7 on your quiz is to identify this virus. This virus killed 90% of all cattle in Africa. Question 8, I want you to identify this pest. This was a pest that lowered food consumption in about 20 African countries, starting from the mid-70s, spread across about 20 countries in the middle of Africa. The diseases really matter a lot. Patience matters a lot. As Peter said, agriculture takes time. Kenyans spent 80 years developing their improved cattle breeds. The Zimbabweans took 28 years before they released SR52. This was the maize hybrid that really revolutionized maize breeding in Africa. The cassava varieties took 25 years of active breeding. It's what Phil Pardee calls slow magic. Works, but it's slow. You have to keep at it. In part because these pests and diseases mutate constantly. The picture on the left is the cassava mosaic virus. Picture on the right shows what it does. It basically shuts down the photosynthesis factory in the leaves. And this is what happens to your production. If you look at that dotted line, this is what the Ugandans think happened to their cassava production when a new mutation of the cassava mosaic virus hit them out of nowhere in 1989. They think that production fell in half. They lost 500 varieties of cassava within a decade. So these viruses mutate very fast, and the productivity impacts are huge. So you've got to keep your breeding programs in motion. You can't shut them down. The last thing I would say is that you need to think regionally. Africa is a constellation of 54 very tiny countries, and in virtually all of the studies we looked at, there were big spillovers, big productivity spillovers. You have to be looking for those going in, because if you don't, you're going to lose half of your benefits. There's a picture from northern Mozambique that shows why the northern Mozambicans are able to bail out the Malawians when they have a bad harvest year, which happens every 5 or so years. Now, the conclusions here are that success is possible in African agriculture. It's possible if 2 ingredients are in place: improved productivity and strong incentives. And to get there, you have to worry about what public goods are necessary, you have to be patient, and you have to think regionally.